Montana Territory. August 1879. The dust hadn't even settled from the stagecoach wheels when someone laughed loud enough to turn heads. Heard the new school teacher's got a face like a mule's backside. A man cracked from the porch of the general store, boots propped, chewing a sliver of tobacco. Brielle Carson didn't flinch as she stepped down from the coach. She heard every word. Her spine stayed straight, her chin level, the worn carpetbag gripped tight in her hand. She had grown used to those kinds of words back in Illinois and now here in Dry Creek. Plain, forgettable, homely. She had heard them all. She had not come west for beauty. She had come to leave things behind. The town was rough-edged and sun-baked, the wooden buildings low and stubborn-looking. A small schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, the bell up top rusted but steady. That would be hers come Monday morning. She had no plans to impress anyone, only teach, earn her pay, and keep her head down. But someone was watching her. Across the road, beside the livery stable, a tall man leaned against a post, tan hat tipped low over his eyes. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, arms crossed, boots dusty from the trail. He looked like he belonged to the land itself, quiet, sun-worn and steady. He did not laugh. Instead, his gaze followed her all the way to the boarding house, and when she paused at the door, he tipped his hat. Not mockingly, not with pity, respectfully. That was the first time Brielle saw him. His name was Holden Vaughn. Folks called him a cowboy, but he worked his own land south of town, a stretch of prairie with cattle and 2 good horses. He was known to keep to himself, never married, no family close by. He was 32, quiet and hard to read. Brielle met him again 3 days later, though she did not know it was coming. It was just after supper, the sun slanting low over the hills. She had taken a walk to clear her thoughts, skirts brushing the dry grass, hands clasped in front of her. She didn't hear the horse until it was close. "You should not be out here alone," the voice said. She turned, startled. It was him, Holden, on a chestnut mare, reins loose in one hand. "I needed air," she said. He nodded once, dismounting. "I can walk you back." She hesitated. "Why?" He looked at her then, square in the eyes. "Because I saw how they talked to you, and I think you deserve better than that." She blinked. "You do not even know me. I know what I see." "And what do you see?" He said it like it was a fact. "The only beauty I have seen in this town." Brielle stared at him, a flush rising up her neck. She was used to being called plain, used to people not looking at her at all. But this man, this stranger, was looking at her like she mattered. They walked back to town, side by side, his horse following behind. He did not try to charm her. He did not flatter her with empty things. He asked about her work, her family, her reasons for coming west. She spoke little, but enough. By the time they reached the boarding house, she felt something strange. Not trust exactly, but the beginning of it. He tipped his hat again. "I will see you around, Miss Carson." And he did. Over the next weeks, Holden came by often, sometimes with fresh eggs from his hens, sometimes with books for the children, sometimes just to talk. He never asked anything of her, never expected. He only showed up, steady as sunrise. The children at the school liked him. One day, a little girl named Grace with honey blonde curls tugged at Brielle's sleeve and whispered, "Is he your sweetheart?" Brielle flushed, then shook her head. "No, child." But the thought stayed with her long after the bell rang. On a Sunday afternoon, Holden invited her to see his land. She hesitated, but agreed in part because she wanted to know what he looked like in his own world. The ride was long, the trail narrow and winding. His cabin sat near a bend in the river, with cottonwoods shading the porch and the smell of wood smoke in the air. It was modest, but clean. A place built by hands that knew patience. "You live alone?" she asked, stepping inside. He nodded. "Since I was 16, she looked around. "It is quiet." "I like quiet," he said, then added, But it is not always good for a man to be alone so long. She met his eyes. He was not just talking about himself. That night, as they sat on the porch, the sky turning pink with dusk, he asked, "Do you miss Illinois?" She shook her head slowly. "There was nothing for me there." He nodded, then looked down. "I do not know how to say things right, never have. But I notice things, and I noticed you." She turned toward him. "I noticed how you walked into this town with your head high, even when they tried to tear you down. I noticed how you teach those children like every one of them matters. I noticed how you never ask for a thing but still give. And I know this," he looked up, voice low but sure. "Whatever they see when they look at you, it does not matter, because when I look at you, I see the only beauty that makes sense anymore." She stared at him, heart pounding. "You do not have to say anything," he said, standing. "Just. You should know." She rose too, moving closer, hands twisting nervously. "I do not know why you see me that way," she said, voice shaking, "but I think I needed to hear it." He looked at her, eyes soft. "Then I am glad I said it." Brielle stepped forward, her hand brushing his arm. She looked up into his face, and for the first time in a long while, she let herself believe someone might be telling the truth. When he leaned down and kissed her, slow and warm and careful, she did not pull away. And when he pulled back, he whispered, "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Brielle smiled, tears in her eyes. "You really mean that?" "I do." And for the first time in her life, she believed someone did. The wind changed with the season, coming down cooler now from the mountains, sharp with the scent of pine and distant snow. The hills around Dry Creek had turned dry gold, and the cottonwoods along the river had begun to rustle like skirts in church pews. Brielle stood on the back step of the schoolhouse, arms folded tight, watching the sky turn the color of pewter. She hadn't seen Holden in 5 days. He'd left word with one of the older boys that a steer had broken through fencing, and he'd be riding out to check the north pasture. No more than that. No farewell, no promise. Just the simple truth of a man with work to do. She hadn't realized how much she'd started looking for him, how her eyes would drift to the road at midday, or how her hand hesitated over the second teacup in the evenings. She told herself she didn't mind. Told herself she wasn't the sort to pine. But she stayed there on the step until the light faded into dusk. That Sunday, she walked out past the edge of town, not with a plan, but with a pull in her chest she didn't know how to quiet. She followed the riverbank where the land grew still and empty, where even the birds had fallen silent. It was a small sound that made her stop, a clipped whistle, low and rhythmic. She crested a rise and spotted him kneeling beside a split fence post, hands working a length of wire taut. His sleeves were rolled again, hat pushed back as sweat darkened his collar. He didn't look up right away. "You work Sundays," she called, voice carrying easy across the stillness. Holden looked over slowly. "Only when I've got fences to mend." She came closer, careful of the uneven ground. "I thought maybe you'd gone quiet on me." "I didn't want to," he said, standing, "but I figured it best not to press too hard." She stopped a few paces from him. "Why?" He wiped his hands on a rag tucked into his belt. "Because you don't owe me your time. And I didn't want to make you feel like you did." "I missed you," she said, and the words surprised even her. Holden didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at her, the way he always did, like he was letting the words settle before reaching for them. "I missed you too," he said at last. "More than I expected." She stepped closer. "You didn't expect to care for me." "I expected to admire you," he said. "Didn't think it'd go deeper." She looked at his hands, rough and honest in their work. "You've never been married?" "No." "Ever come close?" "One woman came close to saying yes," he said quietly, "but I think she wanted the place more than the man." Brielle nodded. "And now I want someone who sees the life I've made, not what she can take from it." She reached out, her fingers brushing his wrist. "Then you should know I brought nothing west but a bag of books and a name nobody wanted to keep." His voice dropped low. "I don't want what you brought. I want what you are." She looked up, and the sky behind him had gone orange at the edges. A few birds wheeled overhead, heading home. "Come inside," he said. "There's stew on the stove. You'll eat, and I'll show you the quilt my mother made before she passed. It's patched like the land and warmer than it looks." She followed him inside, and the cabin was just as she remembered: quiet, lived in, honest. He ladled stew into 2 bowls without asking what she liked, and she took it without complaint. They sat at the table, knees nearly touching, the silence between them full but easy. After they ate, he fetched the quilt from the cedar chest and laid it over her lap. The stitching was uneven in places, but strong. The colors faded in a way that spoke of years and hands and stories. "She taught me how to mend things," he said. "Not just clothes, all kinds of things." Brielle ran her fingers over the fabric. "Did she teach you how to speak to women too?" "No," he said. "That I had to figure on my own." She smiled, the first in days. "You're not bad at it." "I only speak when I mean it," he said, not smiling back but holding her gaze. "You're the first woman I've ever wanted to build something with, brick by brick." She folded the edge of the quilt in her lap. "I don't know if I'm made for building. I've always been the one who leaves before the weather turns." He leaned forward slightly. "Maybe this time you don't have to." The fire cracked behind them. Outside, the last of the day slipped into night. No promises hung in the air, just the quiet truth of 2 people who had nothing left to prove and everything left to choose. Brielle reached across the table and laid her hand over his. It was a small thing, but it held weight. Holden didn't move, didn't speak. He only turned his palm and held on. The next time Brielle saw Holden, it was early morning and the schoolhouse roof was dripping with frost that hadn't yet caught the sun. She was unlocking the door when she heard hoofbeats approach, slow, measured, and familiar in a way that had begun to settle into her bones. She didn't turn right away. She wanted to see if he'd speak first. "Thought you might like these," Holden said, stopping a few feet behind her. She turned and saw his arms full of split kindling, the rough edges stacked neat, tied with twine. "You think I can't chop wood? I think you have no stove here and cold children come morning." She stepped aside to let him pass. "Leave it by the wall. I'll bring it in later." He set the bundle down, then straightened. "You don't ask for help. You don't wait to be asked." He gave a single nod. "That bother you?" She shook her head. "Just not used to it is all." Holden studied her face a moment, then motioned to the open door. "Let me show you something." She hesitated, then followed him around the side of the building. He crouched near the foundation and pointed to where the boards dipped inward, the wood dark with damp, waters running down from the slope. "Come spring, that'll rot straight through." She knelt beside him, fingers brushing the soft earth. "I've no money to fix it. I've cedar left from the barn repair. And you just give it, I'd use it," he said. "There's a difference." They stood close now, his breath fogging in the chill. She pulled her shawl tighter. "You're good at noticing what needs mending," she said. "Some things can't be left to break." Brielle looked at him long, then stepped back. "I should go inside. The children'll be here soon." He didn't argue, just lifted his hat slightly and turned to go. She watched him walk away, not with longing but with something steadier. She didn't know what to call it yet, but it felt like something built on the quiet understanding they both seemed to carry without speaking. That evening, she found herself sitting on the porch of the boarding house with a needle in hand, mending a hem by lantern light. She heard footsteps before she saw him. "Evening," Holden said. She looked up, surprised. "Didn't expect company. I brought something." He pulled a narrow box from his coat pocket and handed it to her. Inside, nestled in cloth, was a pair of bone-handled scissors. The blades were sharp, the handles worn smooth. "They were my mother's," he said. "I remember her cutting thread by lamplight same way you are now. I can't take these." "You can. She'd have wanted them used." Brielle ran her thumb along the handle. "Why give them to me?" "Because you don't ask for things," he said, his voice low. "And because you take care of what's given." She set the box on her lap and looked at him. "You're not like the others here. I don't try to be. Why stay in a place that doesn't make room for your kind of quiet? I've made enough room for myself. Now I'm hoping someone might want to share it." She didn't speak right away. The lantern flickered, casting soft gold on the porch floor. "I never thought I'd stay in one place," she said at last. "But this town's hard to explain. It's ugly in ways, but not without kindness." "Like people," he said. She met his eyes. "Like me." He didn't flinch. "You're not ugly, Brielle. You're not even plain. You're just not what people expect beauty to be. And maybe that's why it matters more when a man sees it." She looked down at the scissors again. "You see me, don't you?" "Yes. Even when I'm not trying to be seen. That's when it's clearest." She rose, the hem forgotten, and stepped closer to him. The porch creaked beneath her boots. He didn't move, only waited. "I've never had someone speak to me like this," she said. "Not with gentleness. I've never had someone listen the way you do, not with care." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. His palm was warm, his fingers rough with work. "I want to see your land again," she said. "Only this time, not just as a guest." He brought her hand to his chest, held it there. "Then come when you're ready," he said. "You'll find my door open." And she knew without question that he meant it. The frost broke that week, and the earth softened beneath the cattle's hooves. Snowmelt ran thin down the gullies near Holden's pasture, and the sound of it moved through the valley like quiet music. Brielle stood beside the schoolhouse door, watching the children scatter home in twos and threes, scarves trailing, boots kicking up thawed mud. When the last child disappeared down the lane, she didn't go back inside. Instead, she walked to the far fence and leaned against the post, her hands bare to the cold. She wasn't waiting. She just needed stillness before returning to a room that, for all its warmth, felt hollow at the end of the day. She heard the jingle of tack before she saw him. Holden came riding slow, his gelding stride easy, a canvas sack tied behind the saddle. When he dismounted, he didn't speak at once. He just looked at her, his brow drawn slightly, like he'd been turning something over for a while. "You're walking different today," he said. She glanced down. "My heels rubbed raw, the boots old. I brought something." He untied the sack and opened it carefully. Inside lay a pair of women's boots, scuffed but solid, the leather rubbed with beeswax. The stitching held and the soles had been re-nailed. "They were my sister's," he said. "She passed before I came west. I nearly gave them away a dozen times, but I didn't." Brielle didn't reach for them. "Why now?" "Because I figured they'd suit someone who doesn't ask for things but keeps walking anyway." She took them from his hands, weighing them silently. "You trust me with her things. You've earned trust I haven't had use for in years." She looked up. "You don't speak like other men. I listen more." He paused, then added, "You ever think about what comes next, after this job, after this town?" She studied his face, reading something cautious beneath the steadiness. "You thinking of leaving?" "No," he said. "I'm thinking of building something steadier than fences and barns." She held his gaze. "With me. With the woman who looks at a broken thing and mends it quiet, without fuss. The one who sees a child struggling and doesn't raise her voice. The one who didn't flinch when a man said what he saw in her." He stepped closer, his boots sinking slightly in the thawed dirt. "I've got a parcel of land too wide for one man, a house with room I never filled. I'm not offering a rescue. I'm offering space beside me." If it's what you want. She looked past him toward the hills where the light bent soft across the grass. Then she looked back and her voice was clear. I want to come home to someone who listens. I want to wake to silence that means peace, not loneliness. She paused. I want warmth that doesn't ask me to earn it. You'd have that with me. I know. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a copper brooch shaped like a sprig of wheat. The metal had dulled with time, but the etching was fine. It was my mother's, he said. She wore it every Sunday, even when her dress frayed, said it reminded her that things grow again. Brielle touched the edge of it. It's beautiful. I'd like you to wear it. Not because I want to mark you, but because it belonged to someone who loved quiet strength. She nodded once. Fasten it for me. His hands were careful as he pinned it to her collar, the warmth of his fingers brushing her neck. When he stepped back, she looked down at it, then back at him. I'll come to your place tomorrow, she said. I'll bring what's mine. It won't fill the rooms, but it'll be honest. I don't want full rooms. I want the sound of your voice in them. You'll have it. They didn't kiss, not then. They just stood there, the air between them filled with something fuller than words. And when he reached for her hand, she let him take it, her fingers curling into his with ease. Together, they walked toward the edge of town as the sun dipped low, the sky deepening into soft lavender. The thaw had begun, and the ground beneath them no longer held the cold. The wagon creaked along the rutted trail just after dawn, breath from the oxen rising in soft plumes. Brielle rode beside Holden, her small trunk wedged between them, a woven basket resting at her feet. She wore the copper brooch at her collar and kept her hands folded in her lap, gloved against the chill. She hadn't spoken much that morning, but Holden didn't press. He only kept the reins firm in his hands and let the quiet stretch easy between them. When they reached his land, the grass was still wet with dew, and the light hadn't touched the far ridge yet. The cabin stood ahead, solid and waiting, smoke already curling from the chimney. Holden had left the fire banked before riding into town the night before. He always planned ahead. As they pulled up, she stepped down without needing help. He watched her as she lifted her trunk and carried it clear to the porch, setting it down with care. Then she turned and looked at him. I'll need a nail for my coat hook, she said, half a smile at the corner of her mouth. I cut one fresh this morning, he replied. Figured you'd want it by the door, not hidden away. They carried her things inside together. The cabin smelled of warm ash and something faintly sweet. He'd boiled dried apples in molasses and left the pot on the back of the stove. She set the basket on the table and began unpacking its contents. A lidded jar of pickled carrots, a folded muslin cloth stitched with her initials, a small wooden box that held her father's watch, long stopped but still ticking in her memory. Holden came from the back room with 2 chairs he'd recaned during the winter. He set them at either end of the fireplace, then looked at her. If you'd rather take the loft, I can stay down here. She shook her head. If I'm here, I'm here. I'll sleep where you do. He nodded once, then crossed to the stove and ladled 2 cups of the apple broth into tin cups. He handed her one, then sat across from her at the table. I've been thinking, he said. Come spring, I want to add a second room, not just for space. I want it to be something we build together. That's a big thing. I don't plan to ask you for small things. She sipped slowly. I know, that's why I came. They spent the day settling her dresses hung behind a quilt curtain, her books stacked in the corner beside his tools. She rearranged his cooking shelf without asking, and he let her. He replaced the latch on the window while she scrubbed the hearth clean. It wasn't spoken aloud, but they both knew. This was the beginning of something made with 2 sets of hands. That night, after the stew had been eaten and the dishes dried, they sat by the fire in the chairs he'd placed. She read aloud from a tattered volume of Robert Burns, her voice low and steady. He listened, one arm resting on the carved armrest, his eyes not on the fire but on her. When she finished, he leaned forward. "Do you miss your old life?" "No," she said. "I miss pieces of it, but nothing I'd trade for this." He reached for her hand, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. "I never thought I'd have someone to come home to. You do now." That night they lay beside each other in the wide bed he'd built with his father's hammer, the one tool he'd carried west. Her head rested on his shoulder and his arm curled around her waist. Neither spoke. The fire burned low, and the wind moved soft across the roof. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of their life steadied. Brielle rose early to prepare breakfast while Holden checked the cattle. By mid-morning, she worked in the garden beds they cleared together, and by evening they sat over supper and shared what had gone right and what hadn't. They laughed more than either expected, and when they disagreed, they did it plainly without raising voices. They learned each other's silences and moods the way a farmer learns the sky. In April, she stood on the porch holding a ledger, marking rows for spring planting. Holden came up behind her with a carved wooden box. "I found this under the loft floor," he said. "Forgot it was even there." Inside the box lay a pair of silver wedding bands, simple and unadorned. "My parents," he said. "I was holding them for something true." Brielle touched the smaller band. "Do you think this is enough? Just us, this land, the quiet? I think it's more than most ever find." They married a week later under the cottonwoods by the river. Grace, the little girl from school, tucked wildflowers into Brielle's braid. The town preacher came without asking for a fee, and a few townsfolk brought pies and pickles and stood awkwardly until Holden offered them coffee. There was no music, just wine and water and the sound of two people choosing one another. That night, back at the cabin, Holden took her hand and led her to the porch. The stars were out, clean and close. "I don't want a life that's loud," he said. "I want one that lasts." "You've got it," she said, resting against him, and he did. Years passed. The schoolhouse got a new roof. The garden grew to a full acre. A cradle took shape in the corner of the front room, carved by Holden's own hands. Brielle taught a handful of neighbor children their letters and numbers from her parlor, and Holden built a lean-to for visitors who came through needing rest. They never asked for more than they had, and they never had less than they needed. At night, they sat together by the fire, her needle moving through cloth, his fingers still smelling of cedar and soil. They didn't speak often, but when they did, it was with the ease of people who'd chosen each other every day since the first. And when they grew old and the porch steps creaked under slower feet, they still rose each morning with the same promise: to keep building, to keep choosing, to keep loving in the quiet, steady way that lasts. And it did.